get into the webinar, a couple of housekeeping things. We are planning to run for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for question and answer at the end of our session. You'll note in the WebEx window on the right-hand side, you'll see a questions pod. And if you do have questions, you can feel free to enter your questions there. We will accrue those questions to the end of the session, and we'll cover all the questions in the Q&A session. We may not be able to get to all of your questions. If we don't, we'll reply through email after the webinar to any remaining outstanding questions. If you are having any challenges in hearing or seeing during the webinar, you can enter comments in the chat window, also attached on the right-hand side as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce Joe. Joe is an IR and digital forensics specialist. He's been working in the field for more than a decade, running security operations and e-discovery. As the Director of Detection Operations at Red Canary, he leads a team of security analysts where he helps organizations defend their endpoints against threats. Prior to joining Red Canary, Joe built and led security ops, incident response, and e-discovery programs for Fortune 500 companies, including Office Max and Motorola. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe, who's going to start with a short presentation and then get into some demonstrations, and then wrap it up with a few more slides at the end, and then we'll move into Q&A. So with that, it's all yours, Joe.
Thank you. So just a little bit more about myself, just plug for me in the Red Canary team. So why I'm important, or why I have a clue of what I'm talking about most days. Carbon Black and Red Canary, we've been partners. We were one of the first partners with Carbon Black for managed EDR. So my team focuses 100% on EDR data. This is where we eat, sleep, and breathe our day-to-day from our customer standpoint. We've been recognized by Gartner, and we've worked closely with Gartner around various aspects of their EDR technology and MDR solution reviews. And we've been helping customers, and we continue to help customers ranging from 100 endpoint small operations up to 60,000 plus endpoints in managing and monitoring their EDR solutions. So what are we talking about today? So as we mentioned earlier, this is the second episode of Carbon Black's threat hunting series. So each of these we're going to talk about what is a threat, why threat hunt, what is a threat hunt. We're going to talk through the process of engaging in a threat hunt, exploring, take some time to explore some samples of Dridex attack and what that would look like in an EDR solution, and some ideas of what you can use from that information to drive your threat hunts. Then we'll hop back out of that. We'll talk about when is appropriate to do threat hunt, and then we'll close up with any Q&A that may come up through the presentation. So first question, why a threat hunt? One, proactively stopping attacks that we've otherwise missed. So it's gotten past some other tools, capabilities, detection, anything like that. The other point is to find and stop that next attack faster, closing up that feedback loop. Every platform, whether it's your AV, next-gen AV, your firewalls, your SIEM, even EDR, uses some form of signatures. Even my team, we use some form of signatures to identify bad or interesting behaviors. There's some component, whether it's a TTP, an IOC, a traditional signature, anything like that, something that can be classed as a signature. There's some static set of information that you're looking for to identify an alert or something that you need your team to look at. But as attacks develop, those signatures potentially become outdated. They become, attackers have figured out ways to get around those, and you're potentially missing out on information. The other idea is that we've all heard the mantra from the security industry. It's not when you're going to be, it's not if you're going to be compromised, it's when you're going to be compromised. Operating under that idea that some sort of compromise, some sort of breach is inevitable. It's going to happen to everybody in some aspect. Some bad guy, some malware, something is going to happen that's not supposed to happen. And how do we go about finding that, identifying it, and proactively, preventing that or identifying that faster in the future. And that's what really where the core of threat hunting gets into is helping to find those things that your other tools didn't do, and then also building in a feedback loop and using that information to have more complete understanding of your environment and how to prevent or find those attacks faster in the future. So when we talk about threat hunting, we're talking about a evolving threat landscape. The landscape that we deal with, where the perimeter is changing. And so relative to that, we're going to take a point and understand why the endpoint. Why is the endpoint so important? Why does Red Canary focus on the endpoint? Why did we partner with Carbon Black? Why is Carbon Black a great tool to augment and really understand what's going on in your environment and also help you to drive that threat hunting effort? So taking a look back, everybody remembers the good old days, or you've heard of the good old days as we reminisce, of when everything was in the office, the days before when dinosaurs roamed the earth and we didn't have an internet presence. I like to kind of call those days, as and some companies still operate in this, is what I call M&M security. There's a nice hard, crunchy perimeter protection, and then a nice, warm, delicious chocolate center. And that chocolate center is really where attackers are looking for. Historically or traditionally, a lot of that information required somebody to come in through the front door. They had to come in through that perimeter, and that wasn't always easy. Obviously, that's changed. As the workforce gets more and more mobile, as the data gets moved to the cloud, we get distributed teams, all those kind of ideas. That perimeter is moved. No longer is the perimeter at the company boundary, at the network boundary. That boundary has been moved down to the endpoint. Now we're talking about the weakest link in the security chain, which is the user. And where does the user live? The user lives at the endpoint. So in order for that user to do their job, to operate in this highly mobile, highly distributed work environment that we have now, they need access. They need to be able to access that data from all sorts of fun and interesting places, whether it's their home, it's from an airport, it's from a coffee shop, it's wherever. They need to be able to access and get to that data. So we don't have that, that hard, crunchy outer shell, that perimeter where we can build up our walls doesn't exist like it used to. Now everything's operating from the endpoint. The attacker gets to the user, they get to the endpoint, they get to the data. And so that's why we've taken that focus, and we've shifted away from focusing 100% on the network, 100% on the perimeter, and start reeling back and zooming in on the endpoint and getting to the source of the attack, the source of the initial compromise, and getting that improved visibility. So other things that we've seen change in this environment is there's what's called non-malware attacks, or we've heard them called fileless malware. Is things like we got Powlix, we've got all the PowerShell based stuff, we've got things being ported to Python and other built-in tools. We have even things like Locky and other ransomware that are leveraging internal tools, internal processes. You have ransomware that's injecting code into your existing Explorer processes and then using that to run the encryption as opposed to executing an introduced binary. Or they drop a binary, and then that binary spreads its code into running processes, into running memory, into registry, into wherever, and then it lives from there, living in memory, living in the file system, in a way that traditionally didn't happen. And that activity is going around, throughout throughout the attack. Everything from a typical attack where user goes to a website that's they get a malicious ad that pops up, and that loads a flash vulnerability, it loads the browser vulnerability, it triggers an automatic download that executes some script that then triggers PowerShell, that then establishes my own connection outbound, and away we go. And there's been no new binary, nothing new introduced in the environment that we traditionally would identify. So So this is again why we're looking at the endpoint. So then next question comes up. So why threat hunting? What does threat hunting give us? As I said earlier, compromise is inevitable. It's going to happen. And we all know, and we've heard it, that prevention is not the only solution. You can't prevent everything. You'd have to think of the Minority Report. The idea that we have precognitive information about what's going to happen. We haven't gotten to that point. So in order to do that, prevention will stop a lot of things, and having good prevention tools in your environment is important, but you also have to augment that with very good detection. As the attackers evolve, you have to learn about those. It's that cat and mouse game. They're evolving, you have to evolve. And in order to evolve, you have to know about it. In order to know about it, you have to go find it. So one of the ways that we can do that is going on threat hunts. In order for that to be effective and usable, one of the things that we also have to do is make sure that we have a repeatable process that you can implement. Something that is not going to be super heavy on the team. It's going to be fairly low drag. It's got to be a repeatable process as you're going forward. So what are we talking? We're talking about proactive threat hunting. This is actively engaging with your data. So what it is, it's iterative. It's proactive. You're active. It's an action. It's a verb. It's something you're going forth and doing. It's informed. So you're not just going willy-nilly and head down into the data to go poke around until you find something. You have to use information that you know about your environment, or your provider has to know about your environment. Somebody has to know something about your environment to make this effective. Going in 100% blind is going to be less effective. You can do it, but one of the values of threat hunting is going to be helping you understand your environment, gathering that information, and reusing that. So the more information, the better understanding you have of your environment, the more effective your future threat hunts are going to be. Other thing, it's often hypothesis-based. So you want to keep this focused. You don't want to. You have an idea, you have a theory. Let's go out and see if that's happening in the environment. Is this a valid idea? Is this an attack that is potentially effective? What do I know about how attackers are coming into my environment? What do I know about what's normal in my environment? And then where in between there, where do I have a theory? If I was the bad guy, where would that happen? What this isn't out-of-the-box detection. And what I mean by that, this is not something that somebody else has provided for you as a detection or prevention mechanism. These are things that you're engaging and going and finding because you don't have a pre-built detection capability to find this activity. It's not simple indicators of compromise. Those are helpful in understanding and looking for attacks and shortcutting that detection and that prevention, but it's not the only mechanism. Attacker can change the data. They recompile it. They change a timestamp. They change anything, and that hash value is no longer effective. From the network side, attackers are standing up and tearing down domains and hosts all day long. And so that information is helpful in validating and very quickly, and that should be one of the first things that you're building into your security posture, your monitoring posture, is being able to consume some basic indicators. But that next step is that active effort to hunt, to go and dig beyond that intel. And again, same thing, third-party intel feeds, they're great. Those indicators, somebody's already triaged them. Use those, shortcut that process, find that stuff faster. But again, you also have to engage with the data, engage with your environment to understand what's going on and where to look for where those bad guys may be hiding. So let's talk about process. Threat hunting is an action, it's a process. Initial goal is to reduce your attack surface. And so part of your security posture, part of reducing your attack surface is reducing the ways that the attacker can come in. So in the context of endpoint, first thing we have traditionally is the antivirus. We have antivirus is evolving just like anything else. There's some really good solutions out there. All the next gen capabilities are using better heuristics, machine learning, things like that will help with that, further that prevention, which the more you're preventing, the less attack surface that you have. But there's still stuff, it's still, again, cat and mouse game. They're still changing. The attackers are using those same tools and understanding what those capabilities are and how they get around them. So next steps have to be taken to further reduce that attack surface. One of the first things you can you do to reduce that attack surface is good IT hygiene. Make sure you have good controls. Make sure you have good config management. Make sure everything is running as least privilege, and that'll take you quite a ways in reducing the opportunities for that attacker to come in. But again, there's always going to be a hole. It's never we've gone are the days of the bastion host where everything's isolated and there's no way in. There's always going to be a way in. As long as there's humans involved, there's a way in. But you can reduce what damage those humans can do by making mistakes. And then, then we get to threat hunting. So now we've taken what steps we can to reduce the ways attackers can get into our environment. Now we need to go find, we need to go look into the areas that we don't have coverage. We don't have detection. We don't have prevention, that they may be sneaking around, that they may have gotten through the front door. And figure out what those look like. And these are often things that we don't know about, but it's, hey, I have an idea, how would this happen? And that's really what threat hunting gets to. And then finally, and this is one of the big keys that I see, and as a SOC organization, this is one of the big things I tell my team when they're going out there looking for these things. Everything should be driving to how did this happen and how do we find it faster? How do we close the loop? So that's where that whole root cause analysis is, doing that post-mortem. Okay, we went through threat hunt. Did we find something? Yes, we found something. Cool. How did it get there? What did it get past? How do we prevent it, or how do we find it faster next time? And the other thing to consider, and I like to point out when I talk to people about threat hunting, is every hunt won't be successful in finding something bad, but every threat hunt should be successful in learning about your environment. So what did you learn about your environment? What did you discover? What are some holes that you found, or what's some information you can found? And that also falls in that kind of root cause feedback loop category. So switching gears a little bit, let's actually jump into the Carbon Black console. And then we're going to do some run through of some Dridex samples that I had my team run in the Red Canary Carbon Black test environment. So let's talk about Dridex a little bit. Dridex is it's what we classify as crimeware. It's usually financially driven. It's commonly associated as a banking trojan. It's been associated with distribution of ransomware. But typical MO, typical way that Dridex gets distributed is through some sort of spam messaging. Their delivery techniques have changed over time. We've seen ones where it's just a maildoc, it's multiple maildocs, it's a fake maildoc where it's actually a script file or something like that that's getting delivered, or some combination thereof. Usually there's a binary component, or a lot of times there's a binary component involved in the initial compromise, and it's usually establishes some level of persistence, makes it C2 calls, and kind of lives off the land from there. So going from that threat hunting idea and talking about, here we're on the endpoint and those ideas of what we talked about. Okay, what does Dridex do? So let's see. We'll start with a basic theory. So we said that this is typically related to a maldoc. So we're gonna talk about let's talk about Word. One of the distributions that we saw of as far back, as recent as June timeframe, there was a distribution of Dridex that was actually running Adobe as the initial malware, as the initial delivery, and then it was actually embedding a macro embedded Word doc within the PDF. So the user had to open the PDF, then it had to open up the Word doc, and then within the Word doc that triggered the next stage of that compromise. So, my theory here that the hunt I'm going to go on is, when would I see, I'd say, probably it's going to be something weird if I see Acrobat, the Acrobat process launching, Microsoft Word. I might see that, in my environment that may be normal, and having that information is helpful. So in my pretend environment here, I know typically my users aren't, using Acrobat to spawn Word. So that would be something anomalous that I think I should look at, based on what I know of my environment and what I know about the attack that I'm looking for. So first thing I'm going to do is we're just going to do a basic process search. So using CBrew, I'm going to add my search terms. So first search term here, I'm going to look for a parent process, and my parent process is going to be the the standard Acrobat, so which is acro 32.exe. And so that's your standard Adobe PDF Acrobat Reader process. That's what it executes. And then, okay, so I've got the parent process. So I've got, initially, I'm looking right here. I've got just looking at Adobe processes. I'm going to expand out my window here. And so I'm looking, I've got 176 instances where, Adobe, the main Adobe Reader process launched another process. So that was my initial, theory. And then I said, I'm interested in that in relationship to Microsoft Word. So, right now I've got all these processes. I've got a bunch of Adobe processes. So let's drill this down. Let's add a second search term here. And then we're going to say the process name is WinWord. So again, this is pretty simple information. So as I look through here, okay, that cut down my scope by about half, maybe a little bit more, in what we're looking for. And this is kind of the idea that you want to go through when you're threat hunting. You start with your hypothesis and make sure you maintain that scope. It's going to be tempting to squirrel and chase down another rabbit hole as something comes up. Make note of that, but don't focus on that right now. Stick to your hypothesis. Stick to the idea of what you're trying to look for in this particular case. In order to maintain that effective threat hunt, you also want to make sure you're documenting what you do. Document your hypothesis, document your findings, use that information, share that information, leverage that to learn about your environment, learn what's normal. All right, so looking through the information I have here, apparently my friend who likes to name his computer after farm animals did a whole bunch of stuff with Word documents launching from PDF. So they got a couple different hosts here, but really when it comes down to, we only got 2 hosts. So that right there tells me this is probably something unusual, something not normal. Looking at other metadata here to kind of take the next drill in. Again, I know that Dridex usually pulls down at least an initial drop of something bad. It creates a binary. Either it's pulling it down from a C2 channel or it's writing it to disk. So I'm going to look here. So I'm going to go look at my count of network connections, because again, we're keeping this in the context of looking for Dridex. So things I know about Dridex and things I know about in my environment. So let's starting with this first process here. So we see that it made 14 net cons. I'm maybe not familiar with how many network connections Word normally makes in my environment. So this is something I need to learn and maybe make a note of so I understand better next time. And also I see that there's 2 child processes identified as Word. So that means that something launched Acrobat Reader, then it launched Word, and then it launched something else. Okay, I think we're getting close here. This is something interesting to dig into. So I'm going to pull up my information. What do we got here? So we got on this computer, launched Microsoft Word, and then we see in our command line here, I've got something launching out of a temp directory, and hey, lo and behold, it launched a docm file named invoice with some number. Smells like Dridex to me. Dridex, typical docm is your typical macro embedded Word document. And another tell for me is I know Dridex commonly uses invoice in its file name. And there's usually some reference to invoice in that file name. All right, so let's take a peek here and see what we see. So again, one of the things I love endpoint data. You can actually see this process tree. We can walk up and down and see how we got to this point. So we start from an Explorer process. Okay, that may or may not be interesting in this case. I do know that if somebody saved the attachment to disk and then opened it, it's going to launch from Explorer versus launching from Outlook or something else. So let's look at looking at our Adobe process here. We see that it opened this thing that came from attachments. So that's to looking at this, the file was on the desktop in a folder called attachments. So okay, so that's going to lead me to believe that this probably came from an email. And then we have this file name here that's A4, INV, etc. That INV again kind of okay, so we're talking again, potentially Dridex or other mal spam using the indication of invoiced information. See if let's look at the process information here. Let's see if there's other things going on that are of interest. Let's look at what files we're creating, and then where were we going outside of the network. So we're going to filter down my process table here and look at if there's anything that jumps out for me. One of the other things that's nice in Carbon Black here is that it presents some good information about different files. So it's actually giving me a hash value that I could use to check VT or other OSINT tools to find out if there's any known information about those. And I'm just going to go through and look. So on our network connections, we've got made a column to Adobe, calls to a loopback address, and then we see our DCOM object. So it's been identified as in an OpenXML format Word document. So this is in the newer OpenXML format, and it's got that .m or that docm extension. So that tells me it's likely to have a macros embedded in it. So I'm going to drill in a little further and see what we got going on this word process. All right, so that word process then opens this, and let's see what this word process is doing. Let's check netcoms and file mods again. Actually, we'll even start with network connections. Let's just see what Word's been talking to. So right away jumps out at me is we have these IPs and domains that are all associated with Microsoft, and then we have this one. This one does not look normal to me. This is going to be something I'm going to want to write down, record, and check on, see what network information, see what activity I've been seeing going to this domain and this IP, and see what open source information I have about this. I can check right from here and say, okay, I've had 7 processes and 3 different computers. So 2 computers have talked to that IP on 7 different processes, and 3 computers have talked to that domain on 15 different processes. So that right there, okay, again, not broadly spread in my environment, potentially something interesting that I'm going to want to go back as, and note and potentially copy as part of my process. Let's see what else Word did. All right. So then we have, let's check file mods. Let's see what files it created. I'm just going to scan down really quick and see for anything. I'm basically looking, was any binaries created or anything else that captured a hash value. So I've got this tab list, so the PKZip, another one. Should look into those at some point, understand what the normal process is. Scanning down. More OpenXML. But in my quick glance here, and this is kind of the pace that I would go through on a hunt. I'm looking for specific behaviors. I'm looking for specific indications. So let's see what else it launched. It launched Microsoft Word, another instance of Word. Let's see, did it make no network connections? Modified a couple files. Okay, so what I see here is I've got some things that I need to follow up on. I need to understand better in my environment what Microsoft Word does, and I need to look into that IP. But right now that's out of the scope. I'm looking for confirmed Dridex activity. So based on the file names that were activated, I'm guessing that this was probably a Dridex distribution, but there's some indication that it failed. I don't see a secondary binary. I don't see any sort of lateral process movement. I don't see anything else being introduced in the environment. So we're going to go back to my process search. Let's check a different host. So we have that host. Let's check one of these other hosts here. All right, same type of thing. We have some network connections and we have some child processes. Let's look at this host. What do we got here? Okay, we have what looks like a, again, Acrobat, and then we have some sort of obscure decom file name. See what we see. All right, this process tree looks a little different. Let's see what Acrobat. So Acrobat had a dated file, file mods. See what it created for me. So it created a couple of temporary saved files, and then there's our OpenXML document. And see how common this is. This OpenXML document's only been seen on this computer. Okay, in 2 processes. So it's potentially interesting. Let's look at what's going on let's look at network connections. Hey, look at that. We've got that same IP and domain, or that same domain at least, that we saw before. All right, well this is now interesting. And then we see, let's look at what files got created. See what happened here. So again, I'm looking for binaries or other, interesting data types. So I see an interesting file here written with an exe extension, but it doesn't look like it was a complete download because Carbon Black didn't hash it for me. So again, I'm going to make note of this, but again, I'm pretty sure now that I found the Dridex instances. It looks like some of my tools have helped me out here, but I know stuff is still getting through at some point. The initial compromise is still getting through, and we're still seeing activity related to what I've potentially identified as Dridex. So what I'm going to do for my next steps is I'm going to dig into this domain. That's going to be, I'm going to pass that off to my team. Hey, we should probably block this, look at what traffic we're seeing, and pivot around from this. I can even go from Carbon Black and start doing my pivot right now. See what we see. Hey, look, I've got one other host that's chased that, another word process that went to that domain. Let's take a look at this one. This is a different user. Let's just drill in here. Okay, look at that. There's another invoice, and let's look for our file modifications. And then we can also, we can look at here, we can shortcut, look at file mod types. So do I have any, I don't have any binaries, but I can look by anything. I've got OpenXML documents. Again, looks like some template files or something else in there. Okay, so we've learned some things about the environment, and then we've learned, we've got some better information about what Dridex, hey, look at this, they were even nice enough to label it Dridex for us. Isn't that sweet of it? So got some other information. So one other thing we could potentially look for on this hunt, we said we're looking for maldocs, and we're also looking for binary creation. So I'm going to try one other search criteria on this hunt. We're going to say I'm looking for WinWord, and then I'm going to add so then we're going to look for a binary, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to say any file within it that's been hashed written by Word. Let's see what we get for our search. All right, we're seeing the same couple hosts come up. So let's dig into, let's expand our scope here. So, and again, we're seeing those same hosts that come up. So let's grab one of these processes down here. We haven't looked at yet. So let's see, another invoice doc. Okay, let's see that invoice again. We've identified. So this one, weird child process. But now we're interested specifically in file mods, and let's look for file mod types. Hey, I've got one P, so I've got one binary written. Hey, there's that same domain. And look at this. We've got a malicious domain that's been, or malicious IP that's been identified, or potentially malicious, and it's only been seen on this computer. So my guess is that this right here is probably our Dridex binary. So this is the data that's going to get dropped. So I'm going to check this binary out. What do I look? Here, look, SRS, BT says, yep, this is scary. Probably want to be interested in it. It's been seen on 4 computers and 25 processes. Right here, there's that Nearmon file that we saw earlier. There's another couple of files. So there we go. There's our Dridex binary. So now I know in the future that looking for word, creating a binary and with a parent of Acrobat is probably something I need to look at. So part of my postmortem, besides doing this cleanup, is I'm going to talk to my team. I'm going to say, okay, hey, how do we identify this process? Probably going to create a watch list in Carbon Black, see what kind of volume that actually generates for me and how often, how much I can triage that. If I can tune that down, then out of my threat hunt, not only have I found the bad guy, I've now found some information that I can to improve my detection capabilities so that next time, as soon as this happens, I'm getting alert, I'm getting notified, and the team can speed up and we can go look for something new and interesting on our threat hunt activities. And that's one of the keys to doing these threat hunts is learning about the environment and learning how to stop that attack and prevent that attack faster. So I'm going to switch back to my slide deck now. All right, so like we said, attacks, we talked about the fileless malware, we've talked about some of the Dridex instances. The attacks are living off the land. In this case, they're in the binary, and what we'd see if I had if it was been a full chain attack, you've potentially seen it inject into SVC host or launch SVC host, or printer, the spool process, or something else that would be leveraging to maintain that network connectivity, to maintain the activity coming out of that and living off the land. Again, talking about the fileless or non-malware type attacks. Everything from Empire, which was, I believe, the topic of the previous threat hunt, to things like Cover and other PowerShell-based malware type activity that's embedding itself in the registry and using scripting code and things like that to do it. Attackers are, there's plenty of powerful tools out there that are being leveraged for attackers to live within the space of the environment. So, but one of the things is with the proper visibility, they can't hide. We know that they're going to compromise the target. They're going to come in through some standard mechanism. We have information, from previous compromises. What are they using? What activity are they going to be doing for? They're going to be analyzing the environment just the same as we are. So they've got to learn. So they've got to move around. We can look for that. They're going to be staging something up, creating zip files for exfil, creating a back channel, something like that. Doing that actual exfiltration. Have we seen this domain before? Was this domain just registered yesterday? Well, why is PowerShell talking to this domain that's one outside my network and that was just registered today? Probably something I need to look at. And then again, establishing persistence, scheduled tasks, registry run keys, leveraging, even as simple as leveraging the Windows startup folder, creating other scheduled jobs, using the bits admin process. There's different ways that you can establish persistence within the environment, and understanding those and looking for those and auditing those and going on for hunts for where those are being leveraged to understand and look for that anomalous instance. Other side of it is getting your data organized. Again, I'm a big proponent of the endpoint. That's where my team lives. It's where we primarily identify data we see. That's why we've partnered with Carbon Black. But then once you've identified it, use those other tools that you have in your environment. No specific tool is a silver bullet. Some are better at some things, some are better at others. I think the endpoint data is great for finding the initial attack, but then you can use your other tools and your other log sources to understand what's going on, what else happened. Did this user get created? What happened? Did look at your SQL logs. What data are they actually trying to collect? I can see they made the connections to the SQL server. I can see they launched SQL processes. I can see some weird parent-child relationships around that. But what happened within there? You're going to have to actually dive into those database logs. Use those information, maybe on the, on those Dridex samples we were looking at where they seem to have failed. Why did they fail? Let's look at our AV logs. Maybe prevention did part of its job. It stopped part of the attack. The attack didn't get all the way through to the end. We still had a compromise. We still need to understand how that compromise got through those first few steps. But tools that we already have in place identified and blocked part of that attack. So things were partially working as anticipated. Other thing is getting the right endpoint data. You can't always know the bad thing ahead of time. You have to watch and record everything. Carbon Black is a continuous recording tool. It's constantly collecting all of that data. So we're leveraging that data in different ways. Just the raw, unfiltered, all of the things. Having that data is available for you is key. You have your stuff doing scanning, you have your stuff looking at reputation and prevalence and relationships, and establishing those and understanding those. You have to have all that data in order to make those shifts in other directions. But you need to understand what happened. So taking that unfiltered raw data and then pivoting into these other areas will be helpful as you build out your tools and build out your platform and build out your hunt processes. And then, we're talking about knowing when to hunt. When is the appropriate time to go on a hunt? So first and foremost, you came across some new research. There's some, new actor that's, coming out, some new behavior, some new zero-day, some new researchers said, hey, look at this cool thing that I'm going to release to the internet so everybody can do scary things. You read about a breach. Somebody got compromised. It happens. Stay up to date on that. Make sure you're not you're not part of that news article. Try and find as much information about what happened and use that information to go find things in your environment that may be indicative of that compromise. You encountered something odd. Anybody who's worked in the help desk to the security team to server admin has come across something where somebody says, hey, this doesn't seem right. Okay, well, why wouldn't that seem right? What could be going on? What do I need to validate? What do I need to understand about my environment? And then my favorite is when you think when you think of how you would do it. So, as a defender, one of the skills that we have to practice is, hey, if I was the bad guy, how would I get around my defenses? Is anybody trying to do that? So how would I do evil if I was going to do evil? Go look for that. It's a great one. That's one of the ones I push my team for. How would you get past what we do? How would where do we have gaps? Knowing and understanding those gaps helps you to better, understand where to look for those attackers. Again, you know that the attack's going to come, the compromise is going to come. If you know where to expect that attack, you can look for it there. So some other ideas to get started. Look for, command shells establishing network connections. So WMI, CMD PowerShell. Also, I include in that shell ideas, your scripting engine. So on Windows, you're talking WScript, C-script. On your Mac and Linux environments, Python, Perl, Ruby, all those interpreters that are built in. Look for them making connections out to the internet. Is that normal? Why is somebody running an encoded PowerShell or encoded Python script that's making a connection? I don't know. Let's figure it out. Remote network server administration tools by non-administrative systems. So is somebody using AD tools? Is somebody using shadow copy tools? Running it from a computer at the help desk or at the front gate computer or at the lunchroom computer. That's probably not normal. Those are things we want to go look for. Again, in this case, Office documents invoking other processes. How often does Word launch something? I don't know. How often does Excel launch something? Look at those things. Favorites, Flash and Java. Do they spawn one of the shell processes? Any other deviations from normal, especially around your administrator accounts or account creation. And then finally, seeing your core processes, your core OS processes launched from things that aren't normally launched. SVC host launched from something other than services. something other than, look at a clean system and understand what that process tree looks at. What launches services, what launches SVC host, which launches init, when launches LSAS. Understand those core processes and look for deviations from those and go see what's going on and understanding. Maybe there is a use case and it's normal in your environment, but until you go look for that, you don't know that. So other things, how do we go through that threat hunt activity? So I kind of walked through it a little bit, but what you're going to do, you're going to start with that suspicion, refine your hunt. Again, keep your initial, set your scope. Don't get into scope creep. So understand what you're looking for and where in that space. Make notes if something interesting comes along, but for each particular hunt, go through that. Understand and filter out that legitimate activity. Again, make note of that so you can eliminate that on the front end next time you do these hunts. Hunts are repeatable processes, and you're going to keep refining them until the point where you've gotten to the point where it's refined enough that you say, hey, I can detect on this or I can prevent based on activity. But until that time, you need to keep kind of trimming that down and cleaning up that hunt. Get to the point where I need to trigger my response process and go through a full investigation. Was malware discovered? What was the scope of the attack and how do we remediate? How did this come in? Look up and down in parallel to that process. Really understand where that came from. Was this, did they come in through a maldoc? Did they come in through a browser exploit? Did they come through a compromised server on the boundary? Understand that. Know where that came from, and also understand the scope. What's the impact? Look for, hey, I found this bad binary. Is this anywhere else in my system? I saw this bad file modification. I saw this network connection. Where else is this going on in my environment? What processes? Clean it up, and then figure out how to update your defenses. And I think that last piece is one of the most key. It's continuous improvement. This has got to be a repeat process where you're closing that loop. You're taking what you've learned and building that back into the process. Understanding where you have gaps, where you have problems, and addressing those and tightening up your controls and your detection, your prevention methods. So just some further points, talking through, I'm running a little bit over, so I'm going to burn through these a little quick, but finding the attack faster. There's different kinds of attacks. Some of them we said we can prevent, some of them we can detect, and some of them get through. So we need to focus on, getting further in that process. In all those samples we looked at, yeah, it looked like Dridex kind of failed part of the way through, but they still got in the door. Somebody still opened those mailboxes. Other attacks happen. So keep moving that line further and further back up that kill chain. So first thing we need to do is got to make sure we have visibility there. Do we have coverage? Do we have, do we have information? Do we have an EDR solution? Do we have log sources? Do we have that information to understand, as far back as that attack happened? Or do we have blind spots that we need to open up? Do we understand how it happened, the root cause? And then taking all that information. So key takeaways here, if you remember anything, it's, threat hunt should be proactive, iterative searches for attacks, for compromise, for information. They're going to make a difference in when and how you get compromised. You're going to improve your posture. It doesn't have to break the bank. It just requires visibility, data. And even if you got a small team, make this part of their exercise. Make this part. Put a schedule, block out. Hey, once a week, take an hour, come up with an idea, and go on a threat hunt. And do that. One, your team's going to come away knowing more about your environment. Two, they're going to be better equipped to improve your prevention and detection techniques. And three, and then finally, it's going to put you front and center on that attack. You're going to be, your team and you are going to be in that data. You're going to find those attacks. You're going to get those, and you're going to see them happening. You're going to be able to find those things going on and say, hey, now I know about this. Now I know what to look for. I've seen this, And one of the things, again, that's really great about endpoint data is you can actually walk down that attack tree. Yep, I got popped, I got learned from this, but let's make it interesting, and it's pretty cool to see. When I started working with endpoint data, I told many people that I had worked with in the environment doing forensics, doing IR work, doing network SOC work, everything like that. I learned more about malware execution and malware processes and how it moves around in an endpoint, in 6 months of living in the endpoint world and really understanding that. There's a lot of value and a lot of interesting things going on there. So just kind of some wrap-up stuff. Follow me on Twitter. Ping me on Twitter if you got questions. Hit me up. From my team and some of the things that we put out, we have a link to some of our other threat hunting resources. Threat hunting is a passion for me. It's something I push on my team for improving our defenses. So I've written and talk about it there, and so has my team. And then just a link to Carbon Black's threat hunting resources also. And at that, that's the end of my my piece here. I'll turn it back over to Dave. If we got any questions that we can answer in the last 10 minutes or so we've got of the presentation.
Thanks, Joe, very much. We do have a number of questions, so we'll try to get through them. As a reminder to everybody, if you do have additional questions, please enter them in the question and answer pod that's on the right hand of your window, and we'll get to them, as many of them as we can. Let's start back a bit. So you talked about watch lists. Can you say more about watch lists and how they work, how they're used, and then more specifically, there's a follow-on question here that says, how would you make a watch list specifically for this Dridex hunt?
Okay, so actually we'll do this. Let's pop open. I think one of those pictures paints a 1,000 words here. Let me switch my windows. But so a watch list in Carbon Black world is basically it's a saved search. So I've come up with a search context that is interesting to me, and I want to create a saved search for that. So I can come in and let's say we're gonna go back to, we'll use the we'll say parent name is that Adobe process. So that right? Yep. And then say child process name, or say process name is Windward. And then finally, we'll say created a file that has a hash. There we go. So there's my search. So then CB makes it really easy. I've decided that this is usable and interesting, so I'm going to create a watch list. So I give it a name. I'm going to call this drop, and I can put in a description. And then what I can do is I can say, how do I want to be notified when this triggers? So instead of having to manually go through this now, I've said I've gotten my detection. This is where I start building my detection capability. I've gotten this hunt idea down to the point where I've got something that it's quiet enough, and it happens infrequently enough, or there's enough information there, or there's enough confidence level that I want my team to know about. And as soon as this triggers, go look for it. So I can have them email. I can have it create an alert within the Carbon Black portal on the front page, or I can send it to syslog. So maybe I want to integrate this information into Splunk, QRadar, ArcSight, whatever logging tool I'm using, and I can use this data to pivot on as part of my activity. But the idea is that I use my hunt, I use my hypothesis to drill in, and then further build and advance my detection capability. That's what your hunt should always be working towards or striving towards, finding the bad thing and figuring out how to find it faster next time. So this is the way I'm going to find it faster next time.
Great. And Joe, a follow-on to the watch list question. Are watch lists available for common attacks provided either directly by Carbon Black or by others?
Yeah, so in Carbon Black, there is There's a bunch of available out-of-the-box watch lists. Also, I would one of the best sources for that type of information is engaging in the Carbon Black community. There's a very rich community where people are regularly sharing queries and other information that they've used or they've identified to find different attacks. So again, take that information, test it out in your environment, use that as to drive your threat hunt, see what's there, and then ratchet it and tune it to to work within your environment to say, hey, this is interesting, this is neat, and some ideas that you can then take that information and use. Also, Carbon Black has their advanced threat feeds, which is some of the more targeted and advanced threats that, and again, it's available through the Carbon Black portal to identify those activities, and that's again another source. But yeah, if you talk Carbon Black support, Carbon Black community, or give us a ring, and one of our account managers, one of the people, we're happy to have that conversation. No sales push necessary, and we're happy to share some of the things that we use to find bad things.
Next question is, how do you approach the detection of Kerberos abuse? Things like desync and Kerberosting, et cetera.
So again, it's that can be a little challenging, and it's understanding what your in this case what your data is. So again, it goes back to the idea too that no specific tool is a silver bullet. I can use somebody's using a Kerberos attack and they're leveraging or they're doing using ticket replays or other things like that. I may not see the actual, I'm not going to see that traffic per se or that ticket get grabbed, but I can look at, for my Carbon Black instance, I can look at, user activity. So, hey, is this user doing something that's abnormal? I can then integrate that with, Active Directory information and leverage that and pulling in network information and different logging sources and pulling that all together. Again, it comes back to you have to understand what tools and what availability you have and what you're looking for and where that information source is best going to be leveraged. Carbon Black is great for understanding process level information and what's going execution, parent-child relationship, that telemetry information. Also got a lot of good information about endpoint to user. Since this sits at the endpoint, you get accurate information around what host is actually making a network connection, what host is associated with the user. Anybody who's worked in trying to correlate DNS and DHCP logs to make sure that they're getting an accurate host resolution and everything in a Windows environment will understand what I'm talking about there. Any other questions?
I think that's just about all the time we have, Joe. So I want to thank everybody for joining us on today's webinar. For those questions we did not get to, we will send email responses to those individual questions. The session we did today is recorded, so we will also send you a link to the recorded session so you can play back if you missed any particular points. And the resources, Joe, can you just pop the last screen up? Somebody had asked for your Red Canary links as well that you had there on your Twitter account. So if you wouldn't mind leaving us with that.
There you go.
One more slide. Terrific. There. So with that, thank you so very much all for attending and have a great rest of your day. This